I'm literally right in the center of the frame. How can it not find me? Hello? What? Hello? I am a face. What? That's kind of me. And this, my friends, is why I said autofocus for webcams is not always ideal, even on new ones. Another day, another webcam review. In fact, I didn't expect to be getting to this one quite so soon, but here we are. This is the Razer Kiyo Pro. This is quite the interesting webcam. There's a lot to love, but also some stuff to not love. And I'm really torn because it's expensive. And I think for the price, given everyone's reaction so far to the webcam market, people are going to be expecting maybe a little more. But maybe not. Maybe this is the webcam of your dreams, and that's the point of me throwing it in a comparison here for you today. I'm EposVox, your stream professor, and despite what recent Twitter drama may tell you, I'm the only stream professor. This is Razer's new webcam, the Kiyo Pro, which is the next step up, apparently, from their previous webcam, the Razer Kiyo, which I reviewed a few years back. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. It was a nice alternative to the C920 and C922 at the time, and a lot of you all on Twitter have notified me that you actually liked yours quite a bit, but a lot of you have notified me otherwise. Now, my unit was fine, okay overall performance-wise, but I did use it in my PC building streaming setup for quite a while, and the ring light died within like 6 months, and that was disappointing. But Razer typically dips their toes into various markets by putting out something that's kind of OEM'd, kind of like their the Razer Ripsaw, and then the next iteration is done much more in-house and is a lot better, as was the case with the Razer Ripsaw HD, and I do believe this is the case here with the Kiyo Pro. This thing costs $199.99, so $200, which is quite a bit. It's right in line with the Logitech StreamCam, although that's what it launched at. Currently, the StreamCam can be had for about $170. And then the AVerMedia PW513 can be had for about $200 right now, even though it launched at $249. So it's right in line with the other 1080p 60 USB 3.0 webcams, and that's about what they're going to cost. This thing has 1080p 30, 1080p 60 capabilities. It's USB 3.0 using a USB Type-C connection. It's still only 5 gigabits per second though, so it's not going to take advantage of the 10, 20, 40 gigabit per second ports you may have. It has a IMX327 with Sony Starvis technology sensor, which I find really amusing because in the media brief they flex about how this is used in surveillance cameras. I don't think production cameras see that, like, people expecting to use a production camera would see that as much of a flex, but maybe that's just me. It has autofocus, a monitor mount, a tripod mount. The monitor mount actually unscrews from the webcam so that you can just directly mount it to a tripod without the monitor mount at all. It's got a 360-degree swivel. They include a privacy shutter, which I had here and have since lost. It's basically a lens cap. It's not attached to the camera, so you're probably going to lose it. It has 3 field of view options, 103 degrees, 90 degrees, and 80 degrees. And what's interesting and kind of impressive is in the Razer Synapse software, which is the only place to actually control this as far as I can tell, they actually name it similar to how a GoPro would. So you have wide, medium, and linear, and you can tell it's actually like adjusting the lenses quite a bit, and the fisheye effect actually changes, whereas with a lot of webcams the adjustable field of view is just a crop. So I will show this on screen because I can't actually change this while I'm live. None of the Razer Synapse controls are available while I'm using OBS with the camera, which is just stupid. Yes, to use some of the controls, or to at least manually tweak some of the controls for the camera, you need Razer Synapse, which I have had a long history of not getting along with whatsoever. And when I was installing it again to use this camera, it kept prompting me to install like 2 other programs, Cortex and Game Booster or something. That just feels like adware. More programs is not better in this case. This camera also features autofocus instead of a fixed focus lens system like the AVerMedia cams have, although I would highly recommend just turning it off, which is super unfortunate, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. Throwing the camera in line here with my other webcams I've been comparing this week for 60 FPS. We have a top left, the AVerMedia PW315 I just reviewed. Top right is the Logitech StreamCam. Bottom left is the AVerMedia PW513, and bottom right is the Razer Kiyo Pro. They are all set to 1080p, 60 FPS, which, as I mentioned with the AVerMedia camera or the PW513, it's its weakest mode. It's the main mode for the PW315, and for the StreamCam, it's actually all right, although the colors are way different than any of the other cameras. These cameras are all set to manual settings and manual focus for the Razer camera. The Logitech is actually left on autofocus because the autofocus is actually tolerable. Again, we'll talk about that in a moment. But smoothness wise, I just talked about how the AVerMedia P315 was the smoothest 60 FPS webcam I've ever reviewed. And honestly, I feel the same way about the Razer Kiyo Pro here. The frame rate is rock solid. There's no ghosting that I can tell. There's not really much stutter, anything like that. It is silky smooth, ready for some 60 FPS gaming action, 60 FPS camera sync. I talked about it in the last video. I don't consider it to be completely necessary, but the Kiyo, at least in my testing so far, holds up really well in that regard. I'm gonna stop hitting my ring on the ring now. Color-wise, all of this is ungraded so far. You can see how they compare. Again, this is manually tweaked to the best of my ability to match them. So I actually have kind of the pinkness of my skin, which is not how I actually look, matched relatively well here in the AVerMedia PW315 and the StreamCam. This is as close as I can get it, whereas the PW513 in the bottom left has me looking a little orange. Honestly, the Razer Kiyo, once it's set to manual, ends up looking fairly decent. However, I will include a clip of all of these on auto because they were just going all over the place with the color settings on auto. And again, I want to mention that white balance controls for webcams are a disaster because you only have one slider when you're supposed to have two. White balance is controlled by temperature, which is a range of basically orange to blue, or 3200 Kelvin to 5600 Kelvin. There's probably a wider range. It's like 2000 to 3000 or 2000 to 10,000 Kelvin, which is your color temperature. But then there's also color temp, which is essentially red or magenta to green. And so with these cameras, you only get one of those controls, which is the orange to blue. So which is why you end up in situations where I'm overly pink on manual mode in the Logitech StreamCam, and I can't get that out because I don't have that tint slider to add in a little bit of green. And on the AVerMedia PW513, I'm super orange, and controlling that would get me like super green and weird because I can't control that. So I really dislike this. I'm gonna pull up the color chart here to show you what it looks like. Just again, completely out of box on manual settings, but then I will apply a white balance and tint adjustment in my video editor as soon as this finishes showing on screen. This is called a gray card, by the way. You can get one for like 10 bucks on Amazon if you don't have one. They come in different form factors. This one's a super expensive color chart, but this one you can get in a bunch of different forms, and it really helps you nail your white balance because then you can drop a color picker on the gray part or on the white part. Gray's a little bit easier because it's a little bit more consistent, whereas the white can kind of start reflecting stuff. And then that lets you help set your white balance quite a bit better because it can detect the RGB values at a given point, and you can see, oh, red and green are fine, but blue's super spiked, or whatever. Alternatively, you can just use a white piece of printer paper, although they're not perfect. Detail-wise, I'm actually fairly happy with the Razer Kiyo Pro here compared to the competing options. I think the Logitech StreamCam, again, competes fairly well here due to the focusing system at hand. I am in focus with their autofocus, and with the Kiyo, I'm set to manual focus, and you get nice detail resolved in my facial hair and around me and in the background. And again, we will test with the lights on as well because things get a little weird there. Whereas the two AVerMedia cams, between the fixed focus system and the weirdly over-sharpened, over-compressed look of the PW315, I just feel they don't look quite as good if sharpness is a priority. If you're just throwing this in a small little preview window in your, gaming stream and what have you, it doesn't necessarily matter. You probably care more about the light, the overall presentation, and the silky smoothness of the 60 FPS, if that's what you're planning on using, which is pretty cool. Briefly, let's talk about autofocus, because as mentioned, the Razer Kiyo Pro has been completely in manual focus for this entire time, and we are about to change that. Autofocus, enable. So now we're comparing the Logitech StreamCam to the Razer Kiyo Pro primarily because the other two don't have autofocus. So again, with the focus, especially as you get closer to it where the the focusing range of these lenses is a lot more pleasing, the detail resolving is actually pretty nice here. The problem is this thing focus hunts like hell. This is the most distracting autofocus on any webcam I have probably ever used. Every time I move, it is pulsing back and forth. It is trying to find me. It's doing a terrible job of finding me. It's going to focus on my microphone and then it's going to focus on the background. It's rarely going to find my face. Even using their software, there's no box around my face. There seems to be no face detection stuff happening at all. It's just contrast-based autofocus, which is some of the worst. This reminds me of the Panasonic G7 and why I went to manual lenses for so long because of that. And we're getting the same thing here. Like anytime I move, it's pulsing out of focus. It's struggling to find me. It's focusing on the wrong thing. The StreamCam is not necessarily doing a ton better. However, it is doing better. I am still mostly in focus. And I had situations like I showed at the beginning where I was completely centered in the frame, just sitting still, and it just wouldn't focus on me. And it was even worse with the lights on in the background, which we're gonna show now. Again, I feel like the color issues with the Logitech camera are just further accentuated here, but you can see the Razer Kiyo Pro just is completely focused on my background and could really care less about me at this point. Hello? I'm in... Hello? I'm kind of in focus here. Again, webcam autofocus systems aren't great to begin with, and the autofocus is super limited due to the minimum to maximum focusing range being like here to here and everything else is infinity focus. But come on, this, I guess I can confidently state that given that we seem to have, at least with the Razer Kiyo and kind of the StreamCam, like a decent grasp on, well, especially with the 315 as well, a decent grasp on producing 60 FPS now, and seemingly decent at recreating light here. It's time to figure out autofocus for webcams. That should be the next innovation. Again, I don't understand why we're taking surveillance camera sensors when phones going back 10 years seem to have better sensors for not much more expensive when you're buying the individual components. I don't know if they were all eaten up for phones. I don't know what's going on, but it's time for a change there. By the way, this is what it looks like with a bright background in terms of everything else. The Razer Kiyo Pro, however, has a secret superpower if you kick it down to 30 FPS. And that is what they're calling HDR, which I absolutely abhor that name because it's just not right. First and foremost, everybody associates HDR now with SDR versus HDR video creation, reproduction, playback, you know, play it on my OLED back there. It's not that kind of HDR. This is still Rec 709 color space and all of that. But also the implication is that it has a higher dynamic range to recreate some lighting, as we'll show in a moment, but it's still a webcam and the dynamic range is still trash. It's just like extra light sensitivity up front, but HDR sounds cooler, so that's what marketing went with. Now, a limitation here, and I don't know why, is that the HDR mode has to be enabled only in 30 FPS mode. So I'm actually going to have to drop my frame rate here down to 30. And I'm gonna kick it back to manual focus here so I don't distract you all too much with the pulsing, because I am completely out of focus now. If you completely get you out of focus, you get almost like a swirly bokeh effect, almost to recreate like one of my Helios vintage lenses, which is somewhat sought after. And I don't know how much of that is actually swirly bokeh caused by the lens, so much as the super wide fisheye effect of the field of view, but it's actually pretty cool. And not that I would ever recommend spending $200 for this, but if at some point in the future you're looking for an alternate use for this webcam because you've bought a real camera or something, you could set this up like high in a corner, turn on this cool little bokeh effect with it completely blurred out, and then make a be right back screen out of it. I think I'll show an example of that right now. Okay, so this is what HDR mode looks like in 1080p 30 FPS with the lights still on as I had it before. My room is brightly lit, you can see everything, I am brightly lit, and overall the exposure is pretty even if my face doesn't look entirely natural. So we're gonna go turn those lights off and see how it handles the room. Bam, immediately you can see it's picking up quite a lot of brightness from the room that the other cameras won't. If I drop it into comparison mode here, you can see quite a bit in my backdrop in the Razer Kiyo Pro compared to any of the other cameras. And it doesn't look too awful. It's not super shadowy. It's just like the levels are raised, but my face is still mostly the same exposure, which is pretty interesting. Let's take it a step further though. I want to start turning off lights. Bam. One light off. Bam. Two lights off. I'm now streaming with no lights directly on my face, and I just have a kicker light above. And you can already see the difference here. It is astounding. Now this is on manual exposure too. What if we kick it to auto? There we go. Auto exposure picks us up even more. Now I am only lit by my computer monitors here, and yet I am more or less lit and presentable, and you can see some of the stuff going on in my background. Now I'm gonna turn the kicker light off too, because it's causing some weird stuff. All right, now we are entirely on light that's only coming from my computer monitors or the various like RGB around me, lighting my face. I am in complete darkness, and the webcam's handling it fine. Smooth 30 FPS, it's not 60, it's gonna look less smooth than the other cameras, but I'm presentable. So many of you have asked, well, not so many, 10 of you have asked in the comment section for me to make a video about webcams that includes not great lighting scenarios. And I always say no because most webcams don't handle it well. This one does. This might be the webcam for you if you're trying to stream without having bright key lights on your face. Like a lot of people, not to throw shade at anyone specifically, but this right here, this lighting you see on my face in this webcam, kind of looks better than most people's streams with proper, well, not proper, but with lighting set up, and I have no key lights on. That's darn impressive. Good job, Razer. Fix your autofocus though. All right, so the next step, since we're testing not ideal lighting scenarios here, what if we turn on the lights behind us so we have no real light on our face, but we do have backlights? I'm scared. All right, this is the you're doing it wrong, but maybe you just need to have a video call or something. Webcam setup. My face gets a little bit darker because it's trying to keep the room exposure in mind. We could probably tweak that though if we actually open up the exposure settings again. Actually, no, even in manual exposure, it's overriding me here. That's funny. It's like, no, you cannot make your face brighter. Well, that's fine. Just for a quick comparison, here's how the other cameras are handling it. Still, of these cameras, the AVerMedia PW513 is a close second, but of these cameras, this one still has me the most presentable. And now we're back in the 60 FPS non-HDR mode. There's another cool feature in the specs and technical capabilities of this webcam that I really appreciate and have been calling out a lot of webcams for, and I actually called this one out for because they had some confusing mismatch in their product, marketing versus the product spec page. This webcam supports uncompressed 1080p 60 FPS and 1080p 30 FPS over NV12 and YUY2 encodes. They also have H.264 available if you connect it to a USB 2.0 port, which is pretty neat. This is really cool. So for those who aren't familiar, I talk about this all the time, but a quick rundown. These are essentially chroma subsampling uncompressed modes for the webcam, which means the color compression. There's data compression, like encoding, but there's color compression, which means it sacrifices part of the color data to keep a video stream down. NV12 is 420. YUY2 is 422. Ideally, we'd have 444 RGB here. That's totally doable over USB 3.0. I don't know why it's not here other than the camera's probably not capturing 444 RGB, or maybe it's too much for the onboard processor to handle, but YUY2 is still a wonderful option. In terms of what you should choose, this is something that you only really mess with in OBS Studio, by the way. Streamlabs OBS as well, but other, your Windows camera app, your Zoom calls, any of that is gonna use the onboard H.264 encoder for the most part, or the NV12 option, and that's fine. But in OBS, there's literally never a reason in OBS that you want to choose H.264. This doesn't benefit any computer, high-end or low-end, and only makes performance worse, because I know people like to argue against this, but if the webcam is compressing that stream to H.264 on the camera itself, it's then sending that through USB to your computer as H.264. OBS can't just integrate that as H.264 into your existing stream. It's not even encoded at the same bitrate or anything. It has to be decompressed from H.264 added to your stream and then re-encoded. This adds latency, which affects sync, your ability to render your frame rate in the correct amount of time, which causes render lag, and it just uses more CPU power or GPU power in the first place. So it's not ideal. So you want uncompressed modes like NV12, YUI2, RGB. MJPEG is a little lighter weight, which is why something like the Logitech StreamCam goes with MJPEG for 1080p 60, but it is almost just as bad, if not worse in some cases, than H.264 in terms of quality, and because it's literally motion JPEGs, there's usually a lot of blocking, the colors aren't quite right, the levels aren't quite right, and there's still added latency. Uncompressed is the way to go. I'd say if you're on a lower end machine or you just notice performance problems, dropping NV12 is fine, but otherwise, basically everyone else should be using YUI2. This video is brought to you by Nerd or Die and their iridescent stream package. If you want something that's minimal, clean, but also has a little bit of flair with the little sticker accents, Nerd or Die's latest stream package is the one for you. This one is really kind of slick, has light and dark themes, and has way more content and customization than even Nerd or Die's normal stream packages. So check them out in the link in the video description or head over to eposvox.gg/nerdordie to learn more. Overall, yeah, I'd say this is a pretty solid buy compared to the other options available. The AVerMedia camera, the PW315, the Logitech StreamCam, especially for those of you who want low light scenario or HDR capabilities. My only concern is that the autofocus is absolute trash. And so if you're wanting to use autofocus, it will be more distracting and harmful to your stream than it could ever be helpful, which is a problem. That is certainly a problem. Kicking it into manual focus, you can get nice, sharp results that I actually appreciate. It might be this is a little too video looking IMO, but it's fine. And this is an advantage over the AVerMedia webcams. I think I would have preferred the AVerMedia webcams. Now that I'm seeing this happen and the dilemma here, I would have preferred the AVerMedia cameras to still have a focusing system, but make it manual focus. Be like, no, we don't offer autofocus, but you can change the focus to get yourself in focus. Or they could have just had better autofocus. I've never particularly appreciated Logitech's autofocus on their webcams, but it's certainly better than this one. Is it worth $200? That's up to you. You can get, well, pre-COVID at least, you could get pretty close to a pretty ballin' mirrorless DSLR set or mirrorless or DSLR setup using Sony A5100s, or you can still get old camcorders or GoPros for that price, but then you still need a capture card. There are the $15 cant links to at least start with or something like that. But there are still plenty of people who do want, new webcams that are decent looking. And I think this fills a market. Given all the complaints I see about pricing, I don't know if that market's willing to pay $200. If you want to pay less and quality isn't a huge concern, the AVerMedia 315 I just reviewed is a great option for $120. But here you go. Here's my piece. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below and over on Discord at discord.gg/EposVox. Go follow me on TikTok for more streaming advice and tips. I'm EposVox, the Stream Professor. I'll see you next time.